Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of affair Elodie Kulik. At around midnight on January 11, 2002, the French Rescue Service received a heartbreaking call. A woman, her voice panicked, screamed that she had been kidnapped. Other voices could be heard in the background before the noise increased, and the attackers took over the phone, cutting off the call forever. The call left the rescue service extremely worried, but the operators were unable to gather any useful information. Attempts to call the number back were unsuccessful as it was either out of coverage or switched off. The situation led to an investigation into one of the most unusual crimes the police had ever encountered. They had no information, not even the name of the caller. The only option was to investigate the mobile phone number, but at the time, the technology could not accurately track the caller's location, so the technology was of no help. In the early morning hours of January 11, 2002, at around 7 a.m., a random driver in the rural area of Picardy made a disturbing discovery. He noticed a car that appeared to have been abandoned in a ditch, with damage to the vehicle and the passenger door open. Concerned that the car had been stolen and abandoned, he called the police. When asked if anyone else was nearby, he replied that there was no one around. After making the call, he continued on his way. Since it was a remote area, it took some time for the police to arrive, and they arrived at the scene around 8 a.m. A Peugeot 106 was found upside down in a ditch, which seemed unusual as there was a clear and safe stretch of highway nearby, making it unlikely that it had ended up there by accident. There were no signs of braking or skidding on the road, suggesting the car had intentionally left the sidewalk at a high rate of speed. The keys were still in the ignition, but there was no sign of the driver or any passengers. Police used the license plate to identify the owner. Affair Elodie Kulik, a 24-year-old bank employee who lived nearby. While investigating the abandoned car, her bag was discovered inside, raising concerns for police. The bag contained her money, cards, and keys, but she had disappeared without a trace. Police went to the bank where the affair worked. Bank employees told them she had not shown up for work that day. They then contacted the local hospital, but there were no reports of any victims matching Affair's description. That morning, Affair's father contacted the police to report her absence. He explained that he had tried calling her cell phone, but she did not answer and did not make contact, which was very unusual for her. Normally, if she had any problems, she would always notify her family if she would be late or unable to come home. However, this time, she did not respond and it appeared that she had disappeared. Police began searching the area where her car was found and decided to release a photo to raise public awareness of her disappearance. On the morning of Saturday, January 12, 2002, a worker from a nearby farm went to a landfill 12 kilometers from the station. In the distance, he saw what he initially thought was a tree trunk. However, as he got closer, he was horrified to discover the disfigured body of a woman. He quickly called the police to report his horrific discovery. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrifying sight: the partially burned and disfigured body of a young woman, showing clear signs of a violent death. Tests are needed to confirm the identity of the body. The body was discovered nearly 6 kilometers away from where her car was found the previous day, which was unusual. Police noted that this area is not frequented by many visitors. It is isolated and not a tourist destination. This suggests that the suspect is likely a local resident. The crime scene was secured and thoroughly searched for evidence. The gendarme discovered a fresh cigarette, but that may have been discarded by the potential killer. Additionally, a condom containing male fluid was located next to the body. Police focused on finding tire tread marks from any vehicle that might have brought the affair to this location, but they were unsuccessful in locating any. All collected evidence was sent to forensic scientists for analysis. On January 12, the police contacted Affair's parents to inform them of the sad news. When the family learned of the incident, the parents were devastated by their daughter's death. Overwhelmed with grief, the mother attempted to end her life. She survived but fell into a coma, remaining in that state for years until her death in 2011. The desperate father was determined to find his daughter's killer. Affair was a highly intelligent and educated young woman. She studied law in northern France and later returned to her hometown of Péronne. At just 23, she was offered a position at a bank, where she excelled and quickly became the youngest director in the bank's history. She took great pride in her career accomplishments. In addition to her career success, Affair was also very beautiful, with blonde hair and blue eyes. The forensic examination of Affair's car determined that it was traveling at a low speed. There were no signs of collision with another vehicle, raising the possibility that someone inside the car might have deliberately driven it into the ditch. When police checked Affair's mobile phone, they found a call to the local rescue service shortly after midnight. The call ended suddenly after she managed to scream. Police retrieved a 26-second recording filled with noise and unidentified male voices. While this recording did not provide clear evidence, it was notable because it indicated male involvement during the incident. The autopsy results showed that Affair died painfully from strangulation, and DNA evidence indicated that she had been raped. However, this DNA did not match any profiles in the database, suggesting her attacker had no prior criminal history. Police believed that the suspect's careless handling of the DNA would eventually lead him to reveal himself again. However, this assumption raised concerns, as it could result in another victim, so they could not afford to wait. Police organized street patrols and collected DNA samples from all male acquaintances of the affair. If these efforts did not lead to results, the search would expand to the surrounding area near the crime scene. The instincts of the gendarmes proved correct. Just 10 days after finding Affair's body, a police commissioner from another precinct arrested a man named Kirill, who had a history of sexual violence. He was in the area on the night of the disappearance and later attacked another woman, who reported the incident. While Kirill admitted to harassing this woman, claiming it was just harmless flirting, he denied any involvement in Affair's murder. The investigation of Kirill involved checking his car, which had scratches containing gray paint. This paint matched the color of the Peugeot 106 driven by Affair. DNA samples were taken from Kirill for comparison. However, the analysis showed that the paint did not match Affair's car, and Kirill's DNA did not match any evidence from the crime scene. As a result, Kirill was released, and further inquiries into Affair's acquaintances did not produce any new leads. The case has no prime suspect and no new leads. It seems the investigation has reached a dead end. Meanwhile, Affair's grieving father Jackie remains closely involved in the investigation and begins his own investigations. In order to quickly find the culprit, he ensures that the case is widely reported in the media, hoping that this will lead to new leads. On April 15, 2002, 3 months after Affair's body was discovered, new clues emerged in the case. The police received a detailed report from audio experts who had analyzed the recording of Affair's last call to emergency services. The experts carefully filtered out the background noise and identified 2 distinct male voices among the cries for help. One voice was calm and tried to reassure the victim, while the other, more aggressive, argued that she needed to be killed. They noted that the attackers had a heavy accent typical of an area called Picard, which happened to be close to where Affair's body was found. However, this information did not make the police's task any easier. They still lacked data, and the search for a new suspect was slow, with the assumption that 2 men were involved. After 6 months of unproductive investigation, the police department received a call from a farmer in Tertry. On July 8, 2002, he reported discovering a young girl's body on a haystack while heading to work. The shocking scene also revealed another mutilated body. Forensic experts, horrified by the brutality, noted that her limbs were dislocated and her body showed signs of having been run over by a vehicle. This location was only 30 kilometers away from where a fare had previously been found. The victim was identified as Patricia, a clerk who was known for riding her bicycle. She had gone missing just days before the farmer's discovery. Notably, similar items were found at this crime scene. Patricia was recognized as a beautiful girl who worked in a restaurant in Alberta. It was clear to police that these cases were linked, as such violent incidents had never occurred in this previously peaceful area. Witnesses who saw Patricia shortly before her death reported that a black sedan was following her bicycle on the street. At the time, they did not think much of it. Unfortunately, this was all the information the police could gather. The witnesses could not remember the car's make, model, or license plate. However, the police believed this crime was connected to a previous case, and new information about the black sedan helped narrow down the search. The media quickly picked up the story, increasing public fear and spreading rumors about a possible serial killer. The police's struggle to solve the case led to the discovery of a third body on August 21, 2002. In Villabrettoni, a van was found abandoned near the railroad tracks. And inside it, police discovered a third young girl who had been wounded by a bladed weapon and died from internal bleeding. Unlike the earlier victims, this girl's identity was unknown because no one had reported her missing. The police spoke with local residents and learned about the parents of a daughter who had not returned home the night before. They thought she was out with friends. Upon investigation, they recognized the victim as their 18-year-old daughter, Crestel. She was killed approximately 40 kilometers from where the first victim was found. In just 7 months, the gendarmes encountered 3 similar murders of young girls, each caught by the criminals at night on roads between settlements. The locations of these crimes on the map created a triangle that the media called the Triangle of Death. This situation caused public anxiety to escalate, leading residents to hold a memorial procession to express their fear for safety. Even with more police patrols and checkpoints, attempts to gather new evidence and testimonies from other potential victims were unsuccessful. However, by the end of November 2002, the investigation into the second Patricia victim's murder produced new leads. DNA found on the victim's clothing identified a suspect named Jean-Paul Conti, marking an important breakthrough for the police. Police arrived to question Conti, a man who had served 17 years in prison for a series of rapes. When he saw the police, he was very surprised. He remained calm and did not attract the attention of those around him. His home was located in the Triangle of Death, which included the locations where the 3 victims were found. Conti was arrested in the early morning of November 25th, but police needed more evidence to link him to the murders. His DNA was only found on the clothing of the second victim, and there were no traces on the first and third victims. The investigation later determined that he was only involved in the murders of the second and third victims, resulting in a life sentence. In addition, it was confirmed that he could not have been involved in the murder of Affair, as he was in prison at the time. This indicates that the cases of Affair and the other victims are unrelated, revealing that there are at least 2 killers operating in the area, targeting young girls. The investigation resumed with meticulous efforts to identify all mobile devices that may have been in the vicinity where the body and a gray Peugeot 106 were discovered. A total of 14,000 signals were recorded and needed analysis. Specialists undertook a massive task that included reviewing over 600 sent messages, listening to more than 10,000 conversations, collecting 5,500 DNA samples from found mobile phones, and conducting thousands of interviews. Police examined over 500 theories related to the crime, but none provided any leads. The department received numerous anonymous letters identifying various individuals as potential killers. Police followed up on these leads, which consumed a lot of resources, but ultimately did not advance the case. After a lengthy period, police offered a reward of €60,000 for information leading to the capture of the real criminal. However, this also failed to yield results, leaving the police at a standstill. 9 years after Affair's body was discovered, a new police officer joined the investigation. He was a young specialist with a fresh perspective and new skills. He suggested a method that focuses on analyzing the DNA found at the crime scene to search for close relatives of the DNA's owner, rather than just the owner themselves. This innovative technique was used for the first time in France in this case and proved to be a significant breakthrough in the investigation. Progress was made in November 2011 when police identified a relative of the killer. Evidence strongly suggested that the killer was part of the Wired family. It was believed that the elderly man was not involved, meaning that the perpetrator was likely his son. The Wired family had lived in the area for nearly 50 years and their son, Gregory Wired, was a 23-year-old plumber at the time of the murder. To protect the information, police kept his identity a secret for several weeks. However, they were disappointed to discover that Gregory Wired had died in a traffic accident shortly after the Affair murder in November 2003, which was officially ruled a fatal accident. The Gregory's death shortly after Affair's murder explained why his DNA was not found during random sampling of local residents from 2002 to 2010. His profile closely matched the description of the criminal. Gregory, known to his friends as a motorsport racing enthusiast, was cheerful but had a violent streak. He abused alcohol and often lost control when intoxicated, making him prone to aggression. To conduct a DNA examination of the suspect, authorities decided to exhume his body from the cemetery for testing. The results revealed a complete match, identifying one of the killers. The next step for the gendarmerie was to find the owner of the second voice from Affair's last call recording. They began by investigating Gregory's immediate circle. The police aimed not only to piece together the events, but also to ensure that no further threats existed for other young women. While only traces of Gregory were found on the condom at the crime scene, another male voice was clearly captured on the recording. Police then investigated Willy Bardon, a former plumber and bartender who was a close friend of Gregory's. They had many interests in common, and a recording confirmed that it was his voice. Willy lived nearby, and police knew of his past allegations of violence against women, although those incidents did not result in legal action. Witnesses reported that he had chased them in his car. Despite his troubled past, he had no criminal record, which meant that his DNA was not in the police database. He vehemently denied any involvement in the crime and claimed that the police were mistaken. Ultimately, his DNA was not found at the crime scene. In late March 2013, Gregory's ex-girlfriend assisted police in identifying the voices of Gregory and Willy by listening to a recorded phone call. Willy, who had a recognizable accent, was recognized by people who knew him. Despite this evidence, Willy denied any involvement in Affair's death, maintaining his innocence. Some described him as a kind man, a caring husband and father, while others painted a different picture, noting his impulsive behavior, extramarital affairs, alcohol abuse, and repeated advances toward women. Nevertheless, the case against him went to court. The prosecution's case rested largely on the identification of Gregory's girlfriend's voice and several others. Despite the lack of substantial evidence, the court ruled in favor of the prosecution. In 2019, 45-year-old Willy Bardon was convicted of gang rape, kidnapping, and murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. While in custody, he attempted to end his life to prove his innocence. His lawyers quickly filed an appeal, and which was accepted. They argued that the voice on the crucial recording belonged to someone else. Experts analyzed the recording but could not confirm whether it was actually his voice, as it was unclear and discontinuous. This uncertainty raised doubts about the evidence against him. As a result, his conviction was appealed and Willy was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. He was released from prison on September 25, 2020. The story continues. A new trial began, and on July 1, 2021, Willy was convicted again and sentenced to 30 years in prison. His attorney appealed the decision, but the appeal was rejected. The defense team expressed their commitment to doing everything possible to free this innocent man, but he remains in custody. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of McDonald family. Jeffrey McDonald was born on October 12, 1943, in New York, USA. He was a well-known figure in his youth, serving as the quarterback for his high school football team and being very popular among his peers. After graduating from Princeton, Jeffrey attended medical school and completed an internship at a prestigious medical center in New York. He married Colette Stevenson, a high school acquaintance. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed their daughter Kimberly, and 3 years later, their son Kristen was born. After completing his education, Jeffrey joined the Army and was later accepted into the elite Green Berets. In the next 2 years, Jeffrey was assigned to the Fort Bragg military base in North Carolina. After a period of frequent relocations, their life finally became stable. They settled in the nearby city of Fayetteville and lived in a house provided by the state. Jeffrey returned home from work at 6 p.m. and no longer had to go on business trips, which allowed Colette to feel more at ease. She hoped that once Jeffrey completed his service in a few years, they could move to their own farmhouse, away from the city's hustle and bustle. At the time of the tragedy, Colette was pregnant with their third child, and everything seemed perfect. Their love story tragically turned into one of the most horrific crime episodes in U.S. history. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on February 17, 1970, the operator of the Fayetteville Rescue Service received a call from a man identifying himself as Captain Jeffrey McDonald. He reported that a violent attack had taken place in his home, stating that his wife had been stabbed to death and possibly raped. He was unclear about the fate of his children and urged for immediate assistance. The dispatcher quickly dispatched a police car to the scene. As the police were heading to the house, they saw a strange woman standing in the rain at 3:55 a.m. wearing a wide-brimmed hat. She was doing nothing and appeared to be waiting for something. However, the officers didn't have time to investigate further, so they drove past her. A few minutes later, they arrived at the Jeffrey family home, where the police entered through the back door because the lights inside were off. In the first room, officers discovered the body of a woman lying on the floor, showing no signs of life. She was covered in blood, and her position suggested she may have been raped. Her face was severely disfigured. She lay on her back next to her injured husband. As the first officer approached, Jeffrey urgently inquired about the fate of his children, whom he had heard screaming but could not get to. Another police officer searched the other rooms and found a brutal scene in the children's bedroom, where they discovered the mutilated head of 5-year-old Kimberly, with her neck and upper body also bearing multiple stab wounds. In another room, 2-year-old Kristen lay on the bed, suffering from multiple injuries to his back and chest. Jeffrey was in serious condition, having been stabbed in the head and upper chest. At one point, he lost consciousness, but a police officer was able to revive him to gather information about the incident. Jeffrey reported that 3 men and 1 woman had broken into the house. He suspected they were hippies, noting that one of the men was dark-skinned and wore a jacket with a sergeant's insignia. He also described a suspicious woman in a hat whom the police had encountered earlier, but unfortunately, it was too late to find her that night. Jeffrey was the only survivor of the attack that night, while the others sadly did not make it. He received first aid to treat his wounds, including a serious lung injury, and was given a sedative. Once stabilized, police spoke with him about the incident. He recounted that he and his wife had shared a glass of orange juice mixed with alcohol that evening. Since their daughter was sleeping, he decided to sleep on the couch in the living room. Jeffrey falls asleep in front of the TV but suddenly wakes up to intense pain. He is being attacked by 3 unidentified assailants. A woman in a hat stands to one side, holding a flashlight or candle, watching the attack. Jeffrey thinks the attackers look like hippies on drugs. The woman gives orders to the men. Chaos then erupts, and Jeffrey loses consciousness. When he regains consciousness, he finds his wife unresponsive. He tries to give her first aid, but to no avail. Desperate to get to his children, he finds himself unable to move due to his injuries, so he calls 911. The Army Criminal Investigation Department sent the most inexperienced the staff to the scene. After examining the area, he concluded that Jeffrey's story was not true. The officer found the story of Jeffrey, with the hippies, unlikely. He found no evidence that others were present. After this decision, the investigation shifted its focus to proving Jeffrey's guilt. The head of the McDonald family was arrested and Jeffrey was charged with 3 counts of criminal conspiracy. The case quickly turned into a disaster. From the outset, Jeffrey's defense attorneys aimed to assess the professionalism of the police during the search of the house. Through cross-examination, it was discovered that numerous violations had occurred. The procedures used had compromised the integrity of the evidence and the crime scene. The area had been essentially trampled, making it extremely difficult to identify any traces left by the criminals. This situation allowed the defense to argue that the prosecution's conclusion about Jeffrey's involvement in the crimes was incorrect, and that the killers were strangers, hippies. Jeffrey was a devoted family man, a caring father and husband, and a respected professional. As a result, he had many supporters, including colleagues who believed in his innocence. They felt there was no motive for the murder and found it hard to believe he would harm himself just to fake a near-death experience. His grandfather, Freddie Cassap, was so upset that he started a nationwide campaign to prove Jeffrey's innocence. Meanwhile, an article criticized the military justice system for holding closed hearings that excluded the public and the media. The situation did not improve. The trial remained hidden from public view, with more evidence later presented to the Supreme Court highlighting police incompetence. The investigation was sloppy. The ambulance driver tampered with evidence at the scene and even stole Jeffrey's wallet while police were present. An Army doctor compromised crucial evidence, including hair samples needed for comparison. Fingerprints were mixed up with various items such as a phone and a baby bottle. Most of the people involved in the investigation were inexperienced and unprofessional. The number of violations identified continued to grow with each minute of questioning. The investigation received an unexpected tip about a young woman seen on the street in the rain, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Her name was Helena Stokely. Helena was the daughter of a retired Army officer and had a troubled connection with the criminal world. While she was a police informant, she was also deeply involved in the hippie culture and had been selling illegal substances for many years. The police interviewed Helena and obtained valuable information about her associates. However, serious mistakes occurred during the interrogation. Notably, the police failed to record the conversation, which was necessary for presenting evidence in court. The inexperienced police claimed that the investigation into Helena's involvement was still ongoing. However, the situation worsened so much that the police simply did not know where she was. She fled when everyone realized the full scale of the incompetence that was committed during the Army investigation. The investigation must start all over again on all issues. Despite this, the military leadership still kept the hearing closed to the media. Meanwhile, one police officer chose to share information with journalists about the mistakes made by the Army Commission of the Armed Forces. This angered the military leadership even more. While everyone else believed he was innocent, the military commission refused to acknowledge their own incompetence. Unfortunately, they held significant power and were unwilling to back down. They asserted that, although there was no clear motive for the crime, Jeffrey might have used substances that could provoke aggression and potentially lead to murder. Contrary to the prosecution's allegations, witnesses began to testify that Jeffrey was a loving husband and father. The defense presented a large body of evidence in support of this view. Furthermore, at the time of the massacre, Jeffrey was in a stable mental state. Only a small amount of alcohol was found in his system, which would not have significantly impaired his judgment or led him to commit such violent acts. Along with friends and family who testified, qualified experts, including a psychiatrist, evaluated Jeffrey and concluded that he was sane and had no homicidal tendencies toward his family. Even the civil police believed that Jeffrey was innocent due to the lack of evidence against him. His mother had to sell their house to afford legal fees. Ultimately, he was cleared of charges due to insufficient evidence. However, this did not stop the Army Commission from reopening the investigation later on. The military police promised to persist in their efforts to convict Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, regardless of the previous investigation's flaws. They believed that their earlier mistakes did not rule out the possibility of Jeffrey's guilt. The situation was not serious and did not significantly affect the outcome. Jeffrey resigned from the U.S. Army. Disillusioned with the military, he began a campaign to expose the armed forces through the media. However, he was unaware of the powerful enemies he was facing and the dangers that would be placed upon him. Meanwhile, the police found Helena Stokely. She claimed to have witnessed the murder of the MacDonald family, allegedly committed by her friends. Helena was willing to testify in court, hoping to be granted immunity from prosecution. Her testimony was verified through a lie detector test. Despite this, the military leadership refused to consider any other suspects, focusing solely on Jeffrey and preparing to charge him again. In the summer of 1971, Jeffrey and a friend moved to Long Beach, California, in search of a fresh start. Initially not realizing that a conspiracy was brewing against him, they both found jobs in the emergency department of a medical center, where their efforts helped make it the best department in the entire facility. Jeffrey's skills were highly regarded, leading to his work being published in medical journals. He also became an advocate for children's rights, fighting against child abuse. The military prosecutor's office continued to reopen the case, and on the grounds that they had obtained Jeffrey's psychiatric reports, he was charged again. The trial was scheduled for mid-1979 and a smear campaign began. It was a high-profile case, and from the start, the armed forces were formed to fight Jeffrey's. And at that time, people from the highest echelons of power rallied against Jeffrey, a former Army captain. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Blackburn wanted to use the case as a springboard for his career. He was later convicted of forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. But at the time of the triple murder retrial, Jeffrey's reputation was impeccable. The assistant prosecutor had concealed evidence that proved Jeffrey's innocence. And the Attorney General was not even allowed to conduct his own independent examination of the evidence collected or review the case file. It was clear that the judge was biased toward the prosecution, which affected the outcome of the trial. Any evidence that could have proven that Jeffrey innocent was not presented to the jury or provided to Jeffrey's attorney. For example, the victim was found holding 5 strands of light-colored hair. The prosecution claimed that these hairs came from a doll owned by the victim's daughter. However, they actually belonged to Helena Stokely, who was wearing a light-colored wig that she removed shortly after the murder. Additionally, a hair belonging to Jeffrey was found in the victim's hand, but since he lived there, this was not unusual and could have been a coincidence. This evidence did not prove Jeffrey's guilt. The skin particles found under Kimberly and Kristen's fingernails were not their father's and were identified as belonging to the attackers. However, the particles were never analyzed and eventually disappeared. This evidence, along with much else that could have proven Jeffrey's innocence, was deliberately ignored at trial. A key part of the prosecution's case was the pajama fibers found on the chisel believed to have been used to kill Jeffrey's children. The prosecution claimed the chisel was the weapon used and contained particles from the clothing Jeffrey was wearing when police found him on the night of the triple murder. Years later, it was discovered that these claims were false. Police found several black fibers on the chisel that matched those found on the bodies of Kristen and Kimberly. However, these fibers did not match any of the clothing from the McDonald's home. Additionally, wax droplets were found at the crime scene that did not match any of the candles from the victims' homes. These wax droplets were actually used by Helena Stokely in her rituals. Helena claimed to be a witch and practiced magic, which became a key factor in the case. The prosecution made a strong claim that fibers from Jeffrey's pajamas were found in Colette's hair. However, this claim was later proven to be false. The defense attorney, Jeffrey, was unable to object to this assertion at the hearing because it had never been mentioned before. There were also other false pieces of evidence, including claims of bloody marks on the couple's bed sheets, which the prosecution argued indicated that the husband had dragged his wife's body. It was later revealed that these bloody marks did not exist. Furthermore, the prosecution was unaware of important information at the hearing. Specifically, the prosecution was unaware that Helena Stokely had contacted the FBI in 1978, claiming that she was involved in a triple homicide while she was being treated for depression and had attempted to end her life in the hospital. During the trial, Helena said that on the day of the massacre, she was with her boyfriend Greg Mitchell and some soldiers from Fort Braga. They were all using drugs, and according to her, they lost control. Helena mentioned that she called the McDonald family's house late at night to check if everyone was home, but she couldn't remember what happened afterward. The military police then approached her, and she felt so intimidated that during the second trial, she was unable to recount events between midnight and 5 a.m. However, she did acknowledge having a hat and a light wig, which were later destroyed because they could potentially serve as evidence against her. At trial, Helena claimed she had been present at the massacre, holding a candle and muttering strange incantations. However, she maintained that she had not harmed any of the McDonald family. She felt sick when her friends were near the children, prompting her to flee the house. It is thought that the murders were not random. Helena's friends may have been motivated by revenge. The soldiers were angry that Dr. Jeffrey had refused to give them illegal substances. Helena passed a polygraph test 3 times, and her statements were validated. Despite this, her testimony was deemed unreliable. The judge imposed restrictions on providing information about Helena and her soldier friends, which became one of the obstacles for Jeffrey's defense. The defense relied on the psychological profile and personal qualities of the accused to convince the jury of his inability to commit murder. The judge allowed the use of previously collected data, but only if Jeffrey underwent another examination by a psychiatrist. This request was of course a trap, as the psychiatrist had been cooperating with the military for 8 years while the investigation was ongoing. The prosecutor's office, eager to put Jeffrey behind bars for good, asked the doctor to make a finding. After a brief interrogation, the doctor declared Jeffrey a psychopathic murderer. Ultimately, the court refused to allow the use of Jeffrey's previous psychiatric records, which had been obtained from another psychiatrist. Instead, the jury was presented with the new psychiatrist's report, which had a devastating effect on the defense. The prosecution replaced Jeffrey's rosy image with that of a true monster. The jury found Jeffrey McDonald guilty of murdering his wife, Colette, and their 2 children, Kimberly and Kristen, sentenced him to 3 life terms. Even with this, the revenge of the military police leadership was not over. After learning that Fort Braga soldiers had a serious problem with illegal substances, the unit's leadership was unprepared for such problems, which coincided with the emergence of the burgeoning hippie movement. Under Jeffrey, the situation became more difficult for the soldiers to access, which made them unhappy. Later, some gathered to go to Jeffrey's house to take revenge. Helena's guilt was unquestionable. Even her husband, whom she married in the 80s, believed she was involved. He thought she hadn't committed murder but was likely a witness the incident. Helena shared many details about the crime scene that had never been made public at the time. The girl was present in MacDonald's house on that fateful night, and this is well established. She underwent 3 polygraph tests, all supporting her account of being there. Her testimony was also recorded on video. According to her, when they entered the house, they forced Jeffrey to write a prescription for Zach, which led to a fight that resulted in the murder of Jeffrey's family members. Jeffrey was left alive, turned into a martyr. The criminals wrote "Death to all pigs" on the wall, likely trying to imitate Charles Manson, who was widely known at that time. Helena passed away at the age of 30 due to complications from liver disease. This incident occurred in 1970, and Helena's testimony was recorded with the judge's approval. At the time of the triple murder, her boyfriend, Greg Michel, was a soldier struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from Vietnam. As a result, he started using drugs heavily and had to enter treatment once more due to his addiction. He later admitted to a friend that he was involved in the MacDonald family's murder. At the crime scene, several pieces of evidence were collected, including Greg's blood and hair samples. It was noted that he was left-handed, and an independent expert determined that the knife wounds were likely made with the left hand. Additionally, he had liver issues, which prevented him from testifying during the trial. Jeffrey MacDonald's fatal mistake was befriending writer Joe McGinnis. They met just before his retrial, and Jeffrey asked Joe to write a book about his case. Jeffrey believed this would give him an advantage in the upcoming hearings. Jeffrey then allowed Joe to attend all of the meetings in detail. In return, Jeffrey received a portion of the book's advance from the publisher and agreed not to contest the book's contents. The friendship between the two men grew stronger. Joe supported Jeffrey and convinced him that Joe was still defending Jeffrey's innocence. However, Joe eventually betrayed Jeffrey by portraying him as the true monster in his book. From private conversations, Joe discovered that just before the triple murder, Jeffrey had taken diet pills, which were quite strong at that time. Although this was an isolated incident, Joe exaggerated the situation, suggesting that Jeffrey was taking 3 pills daily, which could have led to a serious overdose. Joe claimed this was the cause of Jeffrey's anger and violent behavior towards his family. He even pointed to a specific incident: Jeffrey's daughter had wet his side of the bed. In a normal family, the father would not react angrily to such an incident, but Joe saw it as the reason why Jeffrey, the man who was supposed to love his family, lost control. Joe believed that, under the influence of drugs, he had gone psychotic and ended up killing an entire family. However, a toxicology test found no drugs in Jeffrey's system, only a small amount of alcohol. During the trial, Joe said he had changed his mind about Jeffrey's guilt, believing it was more financially beneficial to Jeffrey. The controversial book did significant damage to Jeffrey's reputation. As a result, support for Jeffrey's innocence dwindled. However, Jeffrey successfully sued the book's author for libel. In August 1980, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit seeking millions in damages. After several hearings, the court awarded him $325,000. While most of the compensation was placed in a trust, Jeffrey retained the right to continue his fight for justice against the author. Jeffrey's story resonated with many people. Several well-known lawyers believed in his innocence and volunteered their services to help secure his acquittal. Despite their efforts, numerous appeals were rejected in 1989. However, during the trial and the review of the court's decision, new evidence emerged that supported Jeffrey's claim of non-involvement in the triple murder, including results from examinations. Unfortunately, the same judge presided over the proceedings. This judge continued to hinder the defense team, demonstrating a lack of impartiality throughout the case. A significant breakthrough during this time was the advent of new DNA testing technologies that allowed Jeffrey's defense team to conduct their own analyses. Sadly, at this stage, the judge repeatedly obstructed the lawyers' efforts to seek justice. Information about Helena Stokely finally emerged. A video of her testimony was made available to the lawyers. By this point, Jeffrey, the wrongfully convicted man, had spent 20 years in prison but had never stopped fighting for his freedom. Meanwhile, the military prosecutor's office continued to resist, attempting to dispute all the new evidence. Additional witnesses were found, some of whom had been intimidated and coerced into supporting the prosecution. Stokely, the MacDonald family's nanny, admitted to the prosecution that she had been at the MacDonald's home during the murders. She also revealed that the prosecution had threatened to prosecute her if she testified in court, which discouraged her from speaking out. Prosecutor Blackburn was eventually convicted of several charges, including forgery, theft, and embezzlement, and was remanded in custody in January 2006. New evidence came to light, suggesting a possible retrial. First, a videotaped confession by Helena Stokely was made public, followed by the release of evidence supporting Stokely's claim. DNA testing showed that hair and tissue found on the victim did not match anyone known and belonged to a stranger. In March 2006, a man came forward to the police, claiming that he had been drinking regularly at a bar with a man who had confessed to the MacDonald murders. This man turned out to be Lena's boyfriend, Greg Mitchell. The last time he had heard details of the case was a few weeks before Greg's death. The cashier at the store near the house, Jeffrey, claimed that he saw a group of hippies enter the store the morning after the murders. They looked unkempt, were covered in blood, and were talking to each other about the crime they had committed. However, they then threatened him with his life. The cashier recognized Greg and Helena among this group. An employee at the rehabilitation center where Greg Mitchell was treated also claimed that he had repeatedly confessed to her that he had killed the Jeffrey MacDonald's wife and children, even writing his initials on the wall of the center. Unfortunately, all of this evidence was ignored by the court. 54 years have passed since the tragic murder of the MacDonald family. Defenders at the Supreme Court are still trying to prove Jeffrey's innocence by filing appeals. His most recent appeal against his conviction was in 2021, but was dismissed. Jeffrey remains in prison but still holds out hope that he will one day be free again. While in prison, he met Catherine, an activist involved in the Innocence movement, and they developed a relationship. She visited him regularly and eventually married. Catherine runs a website dedicated to Jeffrey's case, working to secure his release. The 80-year-old, who has spent most of his life in prison, argues that those who actually committed the crime are still walking free. Many of those responsible have lived their entire lives without facing justice, and some have even died without being held accountable for their actions. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Anel Baez Alvarez. Anel Baez Alvarez was born on March 17, 1998, in Guamuchil, Sinaloa, Mexico. She was the second child of Ilda and Hugo, with an older brother named Omar. Later, the family welcomed a younger sister, Adriana. Initially, she was a shy child. She gradually became more confident, showing grace and charm. She was energetic and always tried to entertain those around her. Anel's father was a tailor, and the family was prosperous, close-knit, and happy. However, the family was no longer happy when Anel's mother was diagnosed with cancer in the early 2010s. The children had to grow up quickly to take care of her. After a tough battle with the illness, Ilda passed away in 2012. The family was devastated, but they didn't give up. They supported each other through the pain and trying to make life better. The tragedy brought the sisters, Adriana and Annel, so close that they shared everything, facing sadness and problems together. Annel remained a cheerful and friendly girl with a passion for dancing and music. As she entered high school, she became an ideal daughter, helping with household chores, caring for her younger sister, and keeping up her good grades. Cooking for the family became one of her favorite activities, especially making desserts, which became her specialty. Annel conquered her shyness and became one of the most popular girls at school. She also started a music group as a singer, where she developed a love for the ballad Amor Eterno. At the same time, Annel met someone who would become her best friend, at least for a while. Her name was Erandi Elizabeth Gutierrez. They became an inseparable duo, earning the admiration of everyone around them and being considered the most popular girls in school. They showed their friendship through social media posts. On October 14, 2012, Annel uploaded a photo with Erandi, expressing her happiness for their friendship. Annel thanked God for the chance to be close to her and even wrote that Erandi had become not just a friend, but a sister to her. Initially, everything was wonderful, but over time, the situation changed. Although they were the same age, their personalities were completely different. Annel was a sweet girl who loved love songs and spending time with her family. In contrast, Erandi lived in Vice's environment and became increasingly involved with drugs, also known in Mexico as bucona. Erandi frequently attended events featuring musicians from this culture, such as the Caliber 50 concert during the Carnival celebrations in Guamuchil in 2014. She also had a very clear political stance. Once, Erandi posted on social media that she took part in a march in support of Joaquin Guzman Lora. On her page, she wrote, "March for El Chapo's freedom. We must rally behind this great cause." This message was accompanied by a photo. Unlike Erandi, Annel usually didn't share her point of view on social media and didn't agree with the views Erandi supported. As a result, the distance between them grew. In 2014, Erandi and Annel of them started attending Guamuchil High School at the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, but they barely spoke to each other. Each found her own group of friends. Annel began spending time with Melissa, Karen, Manuel, and Maria Jose. These friends had healthy lifestyles, followed her everywhere, and admired her. Maria, who had known Annel since elementary school, saw her as the leader of the group. Annel took on this role, and she always looking out for everyone. Annel was very polite and organized. Despite growing apart from Erandi, but she never told her father or siblings about their falling out. Around the same time, Erandi started acting strangely on social media. She posted negative and concerning messages on her page. Some posts were quite alarming, such as, pregnant 13-year-old girls taking psychoactive substances, and bizarre statements such as, her mom is upset that she killed her ex and buried him in her garden, or, it is fortunate that she is envied by the dead. The initial posts didn't make much sense, as Erandi took them from forums or songs. However, with time, some messages began to appear threatening. On February 5, 2014, she posted that she was going to bury someone by the end of the year. On February 23, she wrote that she might seem very calm, but in her head, she had killed the person at least 3 times, and every day her mind was filled with new ideas. A few days later, Erandi wrote that she thanked God no one heard her thoughts, and everything would definitely happen the next day. She kept writing more and more posts, and became very creepy. On March 3, Erandi posted, "Maybe not now and not tomorrow, but soon. She won't say anything to that person, but that person should know that she has destroyed them mentally." The last post was on March 16, where she wrote, "This really drives she to despair. No one in her circle knew who these threats were directed at. However, rumors started to spread at school. Many said that Elodie was upset with Anil because they were no longer friends. Some even accused Elodie of being jealous of Anil because everyone liked her. However, Anil wasn't worried about Elodie's social media posts. She celebrated her birthday with a big party, wearing a beautiful pink dress, and was the star of the evening. Her life seemed perfect until March 19th, when her absence raised concerns in her family. Hugo received a call from Adriana's school, informing him that Anil hadn't picked her up as usual. Initially, he wasn't too concerned, thinking she might have overslept or was with friends after school. He quickly went to pick up Adriana. On the way, Hugo tried calling Anil to see if everything was fine, but she didn't answer. He assumed she was probably still sleeping. After picking up Adriana, Hugo tried to contact Anil again, but she didn't answer. He repeatedly called her number, without success, which made him more worried. Hugo headed to her house in the Los Fuentes area. When he arrived, he noticed the front door was wide open. Upon entering the living room, both he and Adriana saw that some items had been moved. They thought it might have been a robbery. After that, they shouted Anil's name and searched desperately throughout the house, but they also couldn't find her. Finally, Hugo arrived in Anil's room and found the door locked, which worried him. He knocked several times, but Anil didn't answer. In desperation, Hugo broke down the door. Inside, he was shocked to find Anil's lifeless body on the floor, covered in numerous wounds with blood stains around. He immediately called the police, who arrived quickly. Upon examining the scene, the officers initially believed that a very strong person or a group had committed the crime. Although there were some blood stains, they were minimal, suggesting the attacker had attempted to clean them up. During the autopsy, the forensic expert revealed that Anil had suffered 65 stab wounds. The officers concluded that the attack was driven by someone with intense hatred towards her. The detectives noticed that the doors and windows were not forced, suggesting Anil knew the assailant and allowed them into the house. They even considered the possibility that Anil had planned to meet this person that day. However, a check of her mobile phone revealed no evidence of any invitation to her home. It seemed more likely that the encounter was by chance. With no surveillance cameras in the area, the officers interviewed neighbors. Some neighbors reported seeing a slender girl with black hair leaving the house. These accounts helped narrow down the suspects. Afterward, officers began questioning Anil's close friends and family. All her relatives had alibis and insisted that Anil had no enemies, was very friendly, and they couldn't imagine anyone wishing her harm. However, detectives found a post on Elodie's social network very suspicious, where she expressed shock at Anil's death. Some people offered their condolences, but others began accusing Elodie of being the murderer. The post quickly filled with comments blaming Elodie and claiming she was guilty. She then deleted her account's social network, but by then, it was too late. Police questioned several of Anil's friends to understand the relationship between Elodie and Anil. They all said that the two of them no longer played together, and it was clear that Elodie envied Anil for her greater popularity. After the interviews, detectives checked Elodie's social media profiles and found all the threatening posts she had made a few months earlier. However, that wasn't their only discovery. Just a few hours after it happened, Elodie posted that she was a fool and wondered what she had done. She was identified as the only suspect in the crime. This information was kept secret because officers worried Elodie might flee before they could arrest her. The agents patiently waited for the right moment. The case gained so much attention that hundreds of people gathered at a well-known funeral home in Guamachil to say goodbye to Anil. Friends, relatives, teachers, and classmates cried and hugged each other, struggling to believe that someone so young had passed away. Annel's funeral was very crowded, but two people were particularly noticeable, Elodie and her mother. Elodie entered the venue with her head down, and her long black hair partially hid her face. Her outfit was unusual for the hot weather. She wore a hoodie with the hood up and long sleeves, as if trying to hide something. Both she and her mother approached to offer condolences to Annel's family, then sat near the casket containing Annel's body. Everyone whispered and watched Elodie with tense expressions, noting how distressed she seemed. A few minutes after she arrived, officers quietly approached her and asked her to come with them to the police station. Elodie did not resist and went with the officer. The questioning started at the police station. At first, Elodie claimed to be innocent, but after a few questions, she broke down. She lifted her hoodie, showing scratches and bruises on her arms and torso. Elodie confessed that Annel caused these injuries while trying to defend herself. In December 2013, Annel posted a picture online with Elodie, where they appeared hugging, smiling, and partially naked. Elodie was upset because Annel posted a photo without her permission. She asked Annel to take it down, but Annel ignored her request. Eventually, Annel agreed to remove the photo, but by then, their friendship was broken beyond repair. The situation got worse when one of Elodie's classmates told her he had a compromising photo of her, which she suspected was the same one Annel had posted months earlier. From that point on, Elodie started thinking about how to get revenge. In the meantime, she expressed her anger on social media until she couldn't bear it anymore. On March 19, 2014, Elodie posted on her page, "In a world of 7 billion people, she only liked 3 of them." After that, she went to Annel's house in the Los Fuentes neighborhood. Elodie arrived at the door with 2 servings of ice cream and a big smile, saying she wanted to make amends and be friends again. Annel happily agreed and invited her inside. She even suggested they go upstairs to Annel's room on the 2nd floor to chat, just like old times. Once in the room, they started talking and eating ice cream. After a few minutes, Elodie suggested watching a movie. Elodie then said she needed to go to the bathroom and asked not to pause the movie. However, instead of going to the bathroom, Elodie went downstairs to the kitchen. She hid a sharp knife under her clothes and went back to the room where Annel was lying on the bed with her back to the door. Taking advantage of this, Elodie took out the knife and attacked her. Annel tried to defend herself by scratching, pushing, and punching, but she couldn't overpower Elodie. She lost too much blood and died, becoming a victim of a terrible crime. Elodie began to feel anxious, knowing she had to act quickly before Annel's family returned. She tried to clean up the blood using all the rags in the house, but there was so much that she could only clean a little. Eventually, she went to the bathroom, washed her hands, and changed into clothes from Annel's wardrobe. Then, Elodie closed the door to the room, leaving Annel's body inside, and ran out of the house, leaving the front door open. When Annel's relatives heard the story, they were outraged. They knew the tale about the photograph was false. Annel would never do such a thing, it wasn't in her nature. Additionally, Annel's friends stated they had never seen any such photograph. They argued that since both Elodie and Annel were quite popular, the photo would have certainly spread, and someone would have downloaded it. It became clear that envy was the real reason behind the crime. Nevertheless, the motive was no longer relevant. Elodie was the only suspect in the case. She was officially charged with involuntary manslaughter. The legal process moved quickly. 4 officers escorted Elodie to the juvenile court proceedings at the prosecutor's office that handles cases involving minors. After a hearing lasting 1.5 hours, Elodie was found guilty. Even though it was clear she had executed a premeditated plan and the murder was intentional, but because she is only 16 years old, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was transferred to the Juvenile Detention Center in Kaloa. Annel's family thought justice had been served and that it was all over, but they were very wrong. The defense filed an appeal, arguing that the trial took place in Caucan, which was incorrect, as the crime happened in the jurisdiction of Los Machos. The higher court decided to reopen the trial, this time in the appropriate jurisdiction. Despite the expedited process, the verdict was not overturned. This decision made the public extremely angry. Hundreds of Mexicans and foreigners shared images on social media with signs demanding justice for Annel. Several polls were conducted in which more than 5 million users voted, considering Erandi's sentence to be unfair. Many wanted her to receive a much longer sentence. The trial was retried, and Erandi was sentenced again to 7 years in prison. Hugo spoke with journalists and expressed his discontent. Although the sentence was not reduced, he believed Erandi's age was no reason not to impose a longer sentence. He hoped that at least she would serve the prescribed number of years. However, this didn't happen. On July 6, 2016, Erandi's sentence was reduced to 5 years. It was also decided that with good behavior, she could be released even sooner. State police had to close the courthouse gates as many journalists attempted to photograph her. This case became one of the most prominent in the country. Hugo was not informed about this hearing, which deeply angered him, worsening the situation further. On Friday, September 23, 2017, a hearing was held to assess Erandi's behavior in light of changes to the federal juvenile justice law. She was released after serving 3.5 years of her original sentence. Hugo left the court very dissatisfied, feeling he had witnessed a great injustice. He expressed his disappointment because the legislative reforms seemed to favor offenders instead of the victims. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jordan Worth. Alexander Skeel was born on August 17, 1995, in Kingston upon Hull. He grew up in a loving and supportive family. The boys spent their first months in the hospital in special rooms for premature babies, where they fought against very low body weight. Thankfully, with the help of skilled doctors, the children began to recover. However, Alexander's brother gained weight more quickly, and by their first birthday, he showed almost no signs of being premature. In contrast, Alexander was weaker and dealt with a condition called hydrocephalus, which is the excessive buildup of fluid in the brain, leading to him being classified as disabled. Despite these health challenges from birth, Alexander's intellectual growth was unaffected, and physically, he was similar to his classmates. He even participated actively in sports at school. Their parents adored their sons from a young age, showering them with love and care while investing time and money in their education and overall well-being. After graduating from high school, both brothers enrolled in the prestigious Bedford College to continue their studies. Alexander was intelligent, attractive, and made an effort to go to the gym regularly, which helped him gain attention from women. However, unlike his brother, who actively dated and had a vibrant social life, Alexander was shy and preferred to concentrate on his studies. In college, Alexander experienced love at first sight when he met a stunning girl named Jordan Worth. They were the same age, and Jordan came from a wealthy family. Growing up, she was used to getting what she wanted and rarely faced rejection. She always dressed elegantly, took great care of her appearance, and enjoyed a vibrant social life. Jordan was one of the most popular girls on campus and attracted the attention of many admirers. Besides her studies, she volunteered her time, raising funds and providing aid to local shelters for homeless animals as well as to children facing hunger in Africa. Jordan's efforts to make a positive impact were recognized multiple times. At first, her appeared to be an angel, kind, caring, smart, and beautiful. Alexander fell in love with her instantly but assumed that the outgoing and popular Jordan would never notice him. To his surprise, she was also drawn to him and took the first step to get to know him. Although Jordan was more experienced in relationships, for the shy Alexander, she was his very first love. The couple started dating in 2012 when they were both just 17 years old. Initially, their relationship was thriving. They spent a lot of time together and were nearly inseparable. At college, they were often referred to as the most beautiful couple, which made Jordan feel very flattered. The first 6 months of their relationship were filled with love, romance, and mutual respect. They surprised each other with thoughtful gifts and enjoyed celebrating small but meaningful milestones. Their social media accounts were filled with photos of them together, showcasing their happiness and featuring heartfelt captions and declarations of love. To outsiders, it appeared that they were perfect for each other and destined for a long, happy life together. They quickly decided to move in together and rented an apartment. As they were both still students, their parents provided substantial financial support. Fortunately, their parents were supportive of their relationship. Jordan was particularly fond of Alexander's parents because she came across as a responsible young woman with aspirations to become an art history teacher, leaving a positive impression on everyone she met. As time went on, Jordan's behavior started to change. It began with her increasing demands. Each month, she wanted Alexander to update her on everything he did. She openly checked his personal messages on his phone, email, and social media. She would get jealous for no apparent reason. Although this behavior was concerning, Alexander tried to ignore it because he was in love, and it didn't bother him too much. Even when she insisted he wore only the clothes she bought for him, he dismissed it as her way of showing care. Soon, Jordan began to restrict Alexander's social circle. She decided who he could see and who he could no longer stay in touch with, affecting not just his friends and classmates but also his family members. Despite this control, Jordan never complained to anyone, and they still appeared to be a happy and perfect couple in public and on social media. She began to enjoy her control over him. She deleted contacts from Alexander's phone without his knowledge, blocked his family and friends, and even replied to messages on his behalf, often in a rude and insulting way. Afterward, she deleted these conversations, so Alexander had no idea what he had said to people who no longer wanted to communicate with him. The final reason for the breakup occurred when Alexander's twin brother raised concerns. Jordan started to block their communication. By then, their parents also noticed that Alexander was pulling away from the family, while his girlfriend was avoiding them completely. She refused to visit even on holidays and didn't want to talk on the phone. When they did try to reach her, she was openly rude. In the rare moments when Alexander's mother managed to speak with him, she urged him to break up with his girlfriend, warning that the relationship would lead to trouble. However, Alexander, deeply in love, refused to listen and defended his girlfriend, insisting that she cared for him and meant no harm. The Skeel family soon realized that Jordan had pressured their son to drop out of college, quit sports, and get a job. Meanwhile, she took all the money he earned to spend on her own needs and entertainment. The parents once again tried to talk to their son and persuade him to leave Jordan, but they were unsuccessful. In 2013, during his coming-of-age celebration, Jordan committed a shocking act that went unpunished. That day, she and her friends celebrated at a country hotel. As the evening progressed and guests began to leave, Jordan suddenly vanished without telling anyone. Alexander was distraught as he searched for Jordan, fearing something had happened to her. However, she returned to their room in the morning, heavily intoxicated. When Alexander tried to find out where she had been, she violently lashed out at him with both fists and insults, then laughed. 2 months later, during his own 18th birthday celebration, Jordan started a fight in front of Alexander's family and friends. She assaulted a 15-year-old girl, who was a neighbor well known to the Skeel family and had been invited to the party. Jordan believed the girl was being overly friendly with Alexander, which prompted her to attack, pulling the girl's hair and scratching her face. Jordan was still upset, but it was obvious to everyone what her true nature was. Afterward, her parents and brother urged Alexander to break up with her because of her aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Surprisingly, for the first time, he listened to them and acknowledged that she had indeed overreacted. That same evening, he spoke with her and informed her that he would not be returning to their apartment and would instead stay at his parents' house. After nearly 6 months apart, they reunited and had children together. During that time, Alexander focused on his studies and work, rarely thinking of Jordan. However, on New Year's Eve 2014, Jordan surprised him with a call to share the news that she was pregnant and they would be parents in the spring. Alexander felt both surprised and happy. Jordan apologized for not telling him sooner, explaining that she believed he no longer wanted to see her. When the guy's parents found out they were going to have a grandchild, they were overjoyed and invited Jordan to move in with them. She accepted the offer and moved into the Skeel family home. She officially got married with Alexander, and 3 months later, she and Alexander welcomed a son named William. The young parents were extremely happy, and they enjoyed a peaceful and harmonious life together until around mid-fall 2014. During this time, Jordan genuinely cared for her partner, made an effort to please him, and fell in love with him again. When William was 6 months old, Jordan became pregnant again. During this time, she became moody and emotional, insisting that Alexander move out of his parents' house immediately. Alexander attributed her behavior to hormonal changes but agreed to rent an apartment for them in the city, and they soon moved in. In the summer of 2015, they welcomed their second child, a girl named Alice. Alexander was overjoyed and treated his wife and children with great affection. However, Jordan, feeling secure that Alexander would not leave her, began to reveal her darker side. The turning point occurred after the move. Jordan prohibited her husband from contacting his family and prevented his parents from seeing their grandchildren. Meanwhile, she accepted financial help from them and even had Alexander ask his parents for money. Within a few months, she completely dominated him, breaking his spirit and taking control of his life. Jordan frequently humiliated and insulted her husband, and eventually, she began to hit him. At first, her attacks were not severe, as she wanted to see how he would react. When she realized he would tolerate everything, keep quiet, and face no consequences for her actions, she unleashed her cruelty, revealing her violent tendencies. The trouble began during their house renovation when she was unhappy with everything Alexander did. Frustrated, he remarked that it seemed impossible to satisfy her. In response, she threw a hammer at him, hitting him on the head and causing a deep wound. Dazed and nearly unconscious, he fell to the ground, holding his head as blood streamed down his face. He asked his wife for help or to call an ambulance, but she coldly told him, "Crawl away somewhere and die," and walked into another room to watch TV. Alexander treated his head injury on his own without visiting a doctor or telling anyone. This led Jordan to believe she could do anything without consequences, convinced her husband would never report her actions and would avoid both hospitals and the police. For the next 3 years, Alexander endured constant emotional and physical suffering. He became so depressed that he didn't recognize the threat he was under. Despite this, he continued to work hard to provide for his family, but his frustration and dissatisfaction with his wife grew steadily. Jordan not only controlled him every day but also escalated the cruelty. He was not allowed to sleep on the bed and had to lie on the floor next to the bed, without a blanket or pillow. He was also banned from entering the kitchen and could only eat the leftovers that his wife and children didn't finish. This left Alexander starving. As he was unable to buy food, Jordan had taken all his money. Furthermore, his wife deprived him of sleep and rest, creating a cruel form of entertainment for herself. Whenever he finally fell asleep, she would hit him on the head or pour boiling water on him. He later remembered waking up each time in intense pain, either bleeding or burned. After that, he would tend to his wounds with whatever he could find, while his wife quietly went to bed. Alexander viewed this situation as normal. He felt morally defeated and stopped trying to fight against it. He completely cut off communication with his parents and brother, and his wife frequently asked them for money on his behalf. She also supported her own parents financially, ensuring she could afford whatever she wanted. Alexander lost a significant amount of weight and dropped below 50 pounds. His body was frequently marked by wounds, cuts, burns, and bruises, which drew concern from others. At his workplace, colleagues encouraged him to seek medical help, but his wife insisted he quit his job to avoid being discovered. After he was let go, he became trapped with Jordan, who began to abuse him continuously, leaving him longing for rescue. Although the couple appeared to be happy to outsiders, their home life was filled with horror. Jordan managed social media accounts for her husband, frequently sharing old photos of their family along with captions expressing their love and gratitude for one another. Nobody could have imagined that a woman who looked angelic and was a mother of two could transform into a sophisticated monster behind closed doors. She knocked out her husband's teeth and inflicted a deep cut on his arm with a knife. His body also showed signs of burns, but he was unable to go to the hospital. At home, he had only plastic wrap and tape, which he used to bind his wounds. Neighbors often heard screams coming from their house, and some were so alarming that they called the police. However, Jordan always managed to convince the officers that everything was fine between her and her husband. During the next visit by the police, prompted by neighbors' concerns, one officer noticed a man with a fresh wound and blood running down his arm. The man appeared emaciated and had bruises of various sizes on his face. Jordan attempted to explain to the officer that her husband was mentally unstable and sometimes harmed himself. However, this time the police called for paramedics, and Alexander was taken to the hospital. The doctors were shocked by his condition. He was barely alive, and his arm was so severely injured that amputation was a real possibility. Alexander had severe second and third-degree burns covering his body. He weighed just 94 pounds, and his shoulder ligaments were injured from being hit with a screwdriver. He also had a deep cut on his forearm, several knocked-out teeth, and many bruises. During this time, Jordan entered the hospital, insisting that her husband be released to her. She claimed that he was fine and that he had caused all his injuries himself. However, no one believed her distressed claims, and it was decided to take her to the police station for questioning. Initially, Jordan denied any wrongdoing and stuck to her claim that her husband was harming himself. However, when Alexander's parents arrived at the police station after visiting him in the hospital, her attitude changed. She went on to explain in detail the actions she had taken against her husband, saying she had trained him like a dog and that he couldn't escape from her. At the same time, Jordan argued that her husband's behavior provoked her violence, alleging he was cheating on her and intentionally trying to upset her. She also maintained that he was mentally ill and had a tendency to self-harm. The man's parents firmly denied all the claims made against him. However, he hesitated to speak out against his wife at first. It was only after receiving treatment and consulting with a psychologist that Alexander found the courage to share the traumatic experiences he endured at home in recent years. Jordan believed that she would only receive a minor administrative penalty, so she was not particularly concerned about the upcoming trial. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge convicted 22-year-old Jordan of deliberately causing serious harm, both physical and emotional abuse, as well as coercive control. She received a prison sentence of 7.5 years. Her status as a mother of 2 young children did not lessen the severity of her punishment. Jordan was taken aback by this sentence, as the case was unprecedented in the UK. The children were placed in the care of their father and grandparents during their mother's imprisonment. After fully recovering from years of abuse, Alexander began working in the community and is now helping victims of domestic violence. On July 4, 2023, Jordan was released on parole after serving 5 years of her 7.5-year sentence. However, she is not allowed to approach her ex-husband or see their children. She is currently engaged to a bricklayer named Adam Stepp and is getting ready to become a mother for the 3rd time. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Richard Beasley. Scott Davis, 48, relocated from South Carolina to Ohio after 15 years of work there. He sought a new job with higher pay to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. While searching, he came across a job posting on Craigslist that said, "We need someone to take care of a 688-acre property and feed the cattle. The position offers $1,300 per week, and you will live in a lovely 2-bedroom mobile home. Older, single applicants are preferred, but we welcome all candidates. This opportunity won't last long, so please apply immediately." Scott was drawn to the benefits highlighted in the job listing. Eager to find a good job, he planned to contact the employer soon. After hearing back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the ad, Scott was quickly offered the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta, where Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi. They appeared to be genuine farmers, which made Scott feel comfortable and trusting. To earn Scott's trust, Richard arranged a preliminary interview with him. He proposed that Scott ride with him to the job site. They drove into a remote forest area where there was no cell phone reception. Richard suddenly asked Brogan, who was driving, to stop the car, saying that he needed to pick up some equipment for the farm near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott exited the vehicle. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest together. As they walked, Richard stayed behind Scott. Scott then heard a clicking sound and some mumbling from behind him. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood that he was the next target. Just as Richard was about to shoot, Scott quickly pushed the gun away, causing the bullet to hit his elbow. He then sprinted away while Richard pursued him, firing his weapon. Bullets zipped past Scott's head, and he heard trees and branches snapping behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the revolver aimed at him. He was unsure of his destination, having never been to this place before, but that didn't matter. His main goal was to escape from Richard. Suddenly, Richard shot at him, hitting Scott in the arm and knocking him to the ground. However, before Richard could take another shot, Scott quickly got back on his feet and ran. Blood flowed continuously from his injured arm. In an effort to evade the gunfire, Scott veered to the right and slipped between 2 large tree trunks. He descended a small, slippery slope and almost lost his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. Scott waved his arms to maintain his balance, ignoring the pain from his gunshot wound. He realized that falling could mean the end for him. As the ground leveled off and he began to run again, he heard the sound of a revolver firing again, right behind him. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away. When Scott broke through the underbrush, he paused, disoriented and unsure. Dense trees and bushes surrounded him, nothing familiar to guide him. The murderer was closing in, crashing through the brush. There was no time to hesitate, he had to keep running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard the revolver fire again. The reality of his situation filled him with dread. He sprinted but stumbled, sweat blurring his vision. His head spun, and a loud ringing filled his ears. Exhausted, he finally stopped by a small ditch, hiding behind a tree to listen for the gunman. Scott felt the fear radiating from him as he groaned softly. His arm bled heavily, but he felt no pain. As his heartbeat steadied, He heard distant dog barks and crows cawing. He strained to listen for anyone searching for him, but the forest remained eerily quiet. After a long wait, he believed he had escaped and felt relief, but it took him 7 hours to feel safe enough to seek help. He eventually found the house and called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. Scott recounted everything about the job listing, Richard, and the chase. He survived an 8-hour pursuit, but not all victims are so fortunate. He wasn't the first to apply for that job, hundreds had been hired before him. In August 2011, a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger faced hardship, unemployed and living in a camp in Aiken, Ohio. In August 2011, Ralph faced difficult circumstances after losing his job and having to move into a homeless shelter in Aiken, Ohio. He was determined to rebuild his life. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he had moved to California to work with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and started his own successful business, where he hired workers and earned a living by renovating homes and taking on various odd jobs. Unfortunately, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he realized he could no longer afford his rent, which led him to seek shelter in a homeless facility. Ralph lost his apartment and faced difficult times, but at least he didn't have the added responsibility of supporting a wife and children, as he was a lifelong bachelor. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who he considered like a daughter, is 26 years old. They have maintained a strong bond since he hired her to clean his house many years ago. Ralph has always been willing to help his friends. In the summer of 2011, Ralph visited the library every day to search for jobs online. By the end of July, he excitedly shared with Summer that he had secured a fantastic position managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job offered him a free mobile home and a weekly salary of $300. Summer was thrilled for Ralph and felt he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph appeared content as well, expressing that this job was a great chance for him to regain his economic independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and encouraged him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without any updates from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to call him multiple times, but each time she only reached his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. Summer encountered someone else when she called Ralph's phone, which appeared to have been reassigned. Although she was concerned about Ralph, she didn't report him missing because she wasn't certain he was actually gone missing. Ralph had gone missing before but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who had faced difficult years. His marriage ended 2 years earlier, leaving him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting anew in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After his divorce, David found comfort in using his computer, often exploring various topics online. One night in October 2011, he came across an intriguing ad on Craigslist. In the Help Wanted section, he found a job listing for a farm caretaker to oversee a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. The position offered a weekly salary of $1,300 and included the use of a free trailer on the property. David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was curious and excited about a new opportunity. He thought taking a break from the city would be a big change, and rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, seemed like the perfect choice. Plus, having a free place to stay would help him save money. He responded to an advertisement and soon heard back. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, kept in touch with him regularly. On October 22, 2011, David called her. He sounded very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He talked about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David chatted for a while. Deborah wished her brother good luck and reminded him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, neither of them realized it would be their last conversation. Back to Scott's story, after Scott escaped a dangerous situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he met Richard and Brogan. However, they encountered a problem. A fire had damaged the surveillance room the night before, making it difficult to recover the footage. The news reported on a man who posted a job ad on Craigslist. Instead of offering employment, he lured his victims into the woods and murdered them. This shocking story attracted significant media attention. Meanwhile, David's sister, who hadn't heard from him in some time, saw the news and contacted the police. They quickly determined that David was another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest for clues related to an attempted murder of another victim, Scott. After 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and soon after, they uncovered a grave that had been dug for him. A K-9 unit was called in, and shortly thereafter, the dogs alerted the officers to something unusual. They discovered another body buried in the damp soil, which turned out to be David, who had been shot in the back of the head. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave with a body that lacked any identification. The sheriff's office in Noble County reached out to the FBI for assistance in finding out who had posted the job advertisement. They needed the FBI's help to trace the poster using the IP address and the advertisement's content. They determined that the job seeker was looking for someone very specific, someone who could vanish without drawing much attention. During interviews, if the applicant mentioned being married or having combat or martial arts experience, Richard would reject them. He was only interested in older men. He did not respond to any inquiries from women who applied. The victims, Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis, fit the criteria set by the suspect. Another man, Timothy Kern, a 47-year-old divorced father living with his 3 sons, also matched these criteria. When he accepted a job in Ohio, he had to leave his sons behind. Timothy responded to the advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after Scott Davis's incident. On November 12th, he visited his sons to say goodbye before heading to Ohio. After that, no one heard from him again. Once Timothy went missing, the investigation intensified. About 2 weeks later, the FBI traced the IP address of the ad poster to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. Joe claimed he didn't use Craigslist and that the ads were not his. He was unfamiliar with Richard but mentioned that a man had rented a room there. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner, which showed a local man named Richard Beasley. When Joe viewed the footage, he recognized the man, but noted he had introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. The police were unaware that they had discovered Ralph, the first victim of Richard Beasley, buried in an unmarked grave. They also identified Brogan Raffi as Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken to jail. So who was Richard Beasley and why did he become a serial killer? Richard Beasley, born in 1959, grew up in Akron, Ohio, primarily with his mother, who worked in an office. After graduation, he became a mechanic but had a criminal history, serving 5 years in a Texas prison for burglary and another 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio secretly, adopting a new identity. He created a facade of a compassionate man, pretending to be a pastor and going to church daily. However, his life took a turn when he became addicted to drugs following a car accident, and he eventually stopped working and lost his ability to earn money. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone in Richard's motorcycle group. Richard decided to guide Brogan by discussing the importance of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his preachy attitude, Richard was actually involved in shady activities. He found an apartment near the street where he sought out vulnerable people, such as homeless people and drug addicts, to do shady things. The police eventually caught on to his schemes, forcing Richard to create a new false identity. He then shifted his focus to targeting homeless and unemployed individuals to steal their money and identities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Brogan agreed to testify against Richard and reveal everything he had done. Brogan reported that he witnessed Richard lead Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, which was the same location where Richard later lured David and Scott. In his report, Brogan described the incident, stating that on a hot summer night, they took Ralph into the forest. He mentioned that he walked ahead while Richard and the others returned to the car and that he didn't join them. He recalled that suddenly, there was a loud noise, prompting him to go back to the car to grab a shovel. When he returned, he noted that Ralph was still there and that Richard had put Ralph's clothes and personal belongings into a garbage bag. Richard dug a hole that was about waist deep and roughly 4 feet wide and that they had difficulty placing Ralph's body in it. Finally, he added that they sprinkled lime over him as a sort of ritual. After Richard took on Ralph's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He found a job and took pleasure in his new life. Many of Richard's victims would arrive with most of their belongings in their cars, which he later sold. Scott Davis had mentioned that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview. Richard ultimately targeted Timothy Kern as his last victim. Timothy, 47, encountered the same job search difficulties as the other victims. He found a promising job opportunity, but it required him to move to a different location. Timothy was reluctant to leave his children behind. Since his divorce in 1997, he had kept a strong bond with his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. As a dedicated father and passionate baseball coach, Timothy prioritized spending quality time with his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their family connections through social media, particularly Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about an exciting job opportunity to manage a large 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing with all rent and utility costs covered, and a generous weekly salary. However, he was concerned about the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was apprehensive about leaving his family, the opportunity was too appealing for Timothy to ignore. He got ready to move on Sunday, although feeling a sense of sadness about being away from his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He spent valuable time with his sons before leaving the following morning. One of Timothy's sons received a loving message from him, but nobody realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different location behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were unaware of Richard's address, but they eventually arrested him. Richard didn't realize that Joe, the landlord of his rental home, had contacted the police, who then used Richard's IP address to locate him. As a result, when Richard called and messaged Joe, it assisted the police in tracking him down. He was arrested on November 16, 3 days after killing Timothy. Richard faces charges for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with numerous other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Raffi were tried in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan Raffi had the opportunity to accept a deal for a lighter sentence by providing information about Richard, but he chose to decline. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Although Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to refute the evidence against him when Scott Davis, a key witness and victim, agreed to testify in court. There was also substantial evidence from the crime scene, including personal belongings and identification of the victims found at Richard's home. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence clearly pointed to his guilt. Richard's trial took place later that year, resulting in the death penalty. He was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Pleas Court for resentencing, but the outcome was unchanged. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard appeared via video from the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was sitting in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks during the sentencing. Richard's other attorney, Donald Gallick, argued via video that adding multiple consecutive sentences was unnecessary for someone already facing the death penalty. However, Assistant Summit County Prosecutor Jack Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should remain unchanged. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common agreed with the prosecutors, stating that multiple consecutive sentences were needed to accurately represent the defendant's criminal actions. During the trial, Richard inquired whether he could reclaim a Celtic cross that had been taken during the investigation. He mentioned that the necklace had been passed down in his family and expressed his desire to give it to his newly married daughter, insisting that it was unrelated to the case. He stated that there was no reason for them to keep it, emphasizing that it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It was noted that it was ironic for a murderer responsible for taking the lives of many innocent people to portray himself as a caring father. It remains unclear whether his treatment toward his daughter was genuinely good or merely a facade intended to influence the jury's perception of him as compassionate and incapable of being the serial killer he was charged with being. His mother was there, trusting in his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, and the confession of his accomplice heard in court, Richard had to face the consequences of what he had done. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother stayed quiet and didn't say anything more. Richard appealed the decision but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has repeatedly asserted his innocence, but no one believes him. He is currently imprisoned at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard almost managed to evade capture, but his gun jammed, which allowed Scott Davis to escape. Had Scott not escaped and reported the incident, it's likely that the serial killer in the woods would have gone unnoticed, resulting in many more victims. The story begins with an online job ad that the victims responded to without thinking twice. The key takeaway is to be careful when you see job postings online. Make sure to research both the job and the employer thoroughly to protect yourself from scammers or dangerous individuals. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Camilleri. Jessica Camilleri was the younger daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian couple of Maltese descent. Unlike her older sister Christy, Jessica was born with an intellectual disability. Jessica had an IQ of approximately 55 to 60, significantly lower than the average range of 90 to 110, which placed her in the lowest 1% and classified her as having a mild intellectual delay. Individuals with mild intellectual disabilities typically follow a different pace of development. They may start speaking, reading, writing, and doing math later than others, but can learn to communicate and express themselves in everyday situations. This delay caused her to start school later than her peers. As a result, she was vulnerable to teasing and bullying by classmates who did not understand her condition. Jessica coped with stress and anxiety by lashing out in intense anger, often targeting women. As a result, she developed intermittent explosive disorder. This mental health condition is characterized by sudden, recurring episodes of aggressive and violent behavior. Typically, intermittent explosive disorder starts in children around the age of 6 and worsens during the teenage years and early 20s. It is a mental health issue, not just a normal temper tantrum, and is linked to low levels of serotonin, a hormone in the brain that regulates emotions and mood. Jessica's behavior at school was causing problems, and she often lashed out at both students and teachers. In one incident, she physically hit a male student and refused to stop. As a result, she was suspended from school indefinitely and was forced to stay home under the care of her mother, Rita, who received a disability pension to support her. Jessica struggled with three main conditions: intellectual disability, which affected her cognitive abilities, irrational anger outbursts, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. ADHD is a chronic condition that affects the brain, making it difficult for people, especially children, to control their behavior. Jessica was diagnosed with several mental health conditions, including severe bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Additionally, she had autism spectrum disorders, which impacted her ability to understand her own thoughts and feelings, as well as empathize with others. The effects of autism also made everyday tasks, such as shopping, using public transportation, banking, and working, particularly challenging for her. Jessica had fixations on certain things, including 3 specific numbers: 2, 3, and 5. These numbers were linked in her mind to her favorite colors: yellow for 2, green for 3, and purple for 5. As a result of her fascination with these numbers, she would often create random phone numbers to dial, attempting to speak with men. In one instance, she repeatedly called a family's home in Bangladesh over 100 times a day solely because she liked their phone number. In 2018, her fixation turned to harassment when she began targeting a meat company in Daylesford, England. Her behavior became more uncontrollable, to the point of threatening company employees, including the owner Matthew Leafield, and his family, going so far as to claim she would harm them with a chainsaw. Jessica had an unrelenting fascination with horror movies and she couldn't shake off. She would spend an enormous amount of time rewatching violent videos, especially certain films that captured her attention. Her favorites included Saw, Jeepers Creepers, and, above all, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1974, the latter film was about young people in Texas being pursued by cannibals wielding chainsaws. The graphic violence in the movie led to it being banned in multiple countries, including Australia and the UK. When Jessica's mother, Rita, tried to stop her from watching these films, Jessica would become extremely angry. Jessica and her mother, Rita, resided in a St. Clair suburb of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Vince, Jessica's father, divorced Rita when Jessica was a teenager due to her behavioral problems. Her frequent tantrums put a strain on her parents' marriage, eventually leading to their breakup. Jessica appears to have conflicting personality traits. She has low self-esteem and is childish and naive. However, she often feels narcissistic, believing that she deserves special treatment due to her mental health needs. This thing sometimes made her take advantage of others and prioritize her own needs above theirs. However, Rita still always takes good care of her daughter. She knew her daughter had problems, but felt it was her responsibility to take care of and protect her. After discovering her daughter's harassing phone calls, Rita took the initiative to apologize. Although Jessica loved her family dearly, she was especially close to her mother, who made every effort to meet her needs and chose to care for her at home rather than seek full-time care at a psychiatric facility. In Australia, about 1 in 5 people, or 20% of the population, experienced a mental condition between 2017 and 2018. This equates to around 4.8 million people. Women are more prone to these problems than men. young people aged 15 to 24 years were the most affected. A mental illness is a serious, diagnosable mental health condition. It affects a person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior and can impact their relationships with others. Examples of mental illnesses include depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders. These conditions significantly affect individuals' emotions and relationships, not just them but also their families and caregivers. The tragic incident on July 20, 2019 was the culmination of a series of violent acts by Jessica. Her history of assaulting and violence others has been around for many years, with incidents including attacking the mother-in-law of her sister and aunt by pulling their hair. Despite her convictions, Jessica was never imprisoned and was always allowed to remain under the care of her mother, Rita, who seemed to be the only person who could accept her actions. Jessica exhibited aggressive behavior towards women in public places, such as streets and shopping centers, often because she perceived that they were staring at her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable or ashamed. This behavior reached a boiling point when she got into a physical altercation with another patient in a doctor's office waiting room, resulting in her being banned from the office. Jessica's aggressive behavior continued in 2018 when she physically attacked a nurse during a hospital visit. As a result, she was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days to address a severe episode of her mood disorder. During her stay, she was treated with lithium, a medication commonly used to manage bipolar disorder, in addition to antipsychotic medications. In the months leading up to the crime, Jessica stopped taking her prescribed medication and instead turned to natural to manage her health conditions. At the same time, her mother, Rita, was looking for alternative ways to help Jessica. Rita even paid $2,500 to see a psychic in Sydney's suburb who claims to be able to exorcise demons, an evil force that she believes is influencing Jessica. However, many relatives and friends were concerned that Jessica might pose a danger to those around her, but Rita remained convinced that her daughter was harmless. Jessica's older sister, Christy, described their mother, Rita, as a selfless person who always put benefit others first. This thing was especially evident in the way Rita cared for Jessica, who often rejected professional help. Rita's older sister also realized her unconditional love for Jessica and frequently expressed concerns that Jessica might harm her. However, Rita's motherly love clouded her judgment, causing her to overlook her older sister's concerns. In fact, the day before the fatal attack, Rita had to take Jessica to the police station because she had been making threatening phone calls to strangers. Yet she still chose to ignore the warning signs. On July 20, 2019, Jessica felt embarrassed when her mother scolded her in front of a stranger in a parking lot. The stranger simply walked by, unaware of the tension between them. After visiting her sister, Jessica and her mother returned home. Jessica then asked her mother to order additional food from Red Rooster, but her mother, Rita, declined. Jessica became upset and placed 3 separate calls to the restaurant at 9:18, 9:20, and 9:21 p.m. Additionally, Jessica asked her mother to call a doctor to come to their house. When the doctor arrived, he was frightened by Jessica's behavior and quickly left. He was pursued by Jessica until he managed to safely escape in his vehicle. Rita could no longer wait patiently, so she told Jessica that she had decided to call an ambulance and was to take Jessica to a mental health facility. Unfortunately, this led to Jessica's most severe episode of rage. That night, 57-year-old Rita was violently attacked by her daughter in her own kitchen. The assault began when Jessica dragged her mother by the hair into the kitchen, where had a collection of 7 meat cleavers. 4 of the 7 cleavers were broken during the attack, but Jessica continued to use the remaining ones to inflict harm. She stabbed her mother's head and neck more than 100 times, causing her mother severe mutilation. This brutal act was not solely a result of Jessica's anger, revealing a disturbing level of fascination with violence, likely fueled by her excessive daily consumption of horror movies. The forensic pathologist's autopsy revealed that Rita suffered severe injuries to her head and neck, resulting in her death from multiple stab wounds. The fatal blow was a severed spine at the second vertebra in her upper neck, essentially leaving her head partially detached. Notably, Rita had sustained over 90 defensive wounds, suggesting she was conscious and endured extreme pain and terror for a substantial portion of the attack. This horrific discovery is especially chilling since her own daughter, whom Rita had cared for and loved, was the one who inflicted the brutal violence. During the brutal attack, Jessica's 4-year-old nephew was present at the scene. He was the son of Jessica's older sister, Christy, and had been in Rita's care for a few days. The young boy witnessed Jessica attacking and beheading his grandmother. When he attempted to intervene, Jessica accidentally inflicted a minor head injury on him. The traumatic incident caused the boy to vomit, further adding to the horror of the scene. Jessica called the emergency number from her mother's cell phone after fatally her. During the call, Jessica claimed she acted in self-defense, stating that her mother, Rita, had attacked her first. This led to Jessica defending herself by stabbing Rita multiple times, eventually more than 100 times, and then beheading her. Following the incident, Jessica disposed of Rita's head in a nearby neighbor's yard. Upon arriving at the house in St. Clair, Sydney, New South Wales, police found Jessica outside. Her clothes stained with blood, holding a water bottle. What's striking, however, was Jessica's reaction to the situation. Rather than displaying remorse for her actions, Jessica expressed concern about her own future. She asked police officers and later detectives if it was possible to reattach her mother's head, seemingly holding onto the hope of a miraculous medical help that could bring Rita back to life. A police officer questioned the practicality of Jessica's plan, but she remained optimistic, believing that medical professionals could work miracles through surgery. Jessica also asked if she would face severe punishment, including the death penalty, for taking her mother's life. The officer informed her that Australia does not impose capital punishment, which brought her a sense of relief. Jessica then confessed to the police that her idea to decapitate her mother had originated from the horror movies she frequently watched. A disturbing conversation was captured on a police officer's body camera when they arrived at the scene at 11:43 p.m. on July 20, 2019. Upon arrival, first responders were met with a scene they described as one of the most horrific they had ever seen. The following day, July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared in court and chose not to request bail. According to a friend, this decision was not unexpected, as Jessica likely lacked understanding of the bail process. Jessica Camilleri was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020 after a trial that focused on her long-standing mental health issues. Initially, she had pleaded not guilty to murder, citing her mental health reasons as a reason. In early 2021, she received a prison sentence of up to 21 years and 7 months, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months. This means she will be eligible for parole on September 19, 2035. Christy expresses her grief and shock, revealing that her younger sister Jessica was responsible for their mother's tragic death. While hesitant to forgive Jessica, but Christy expressed hope that Jessica would receive the necessary support and care in prison. This thing helped Rita could finally rest in peace knowing that her daughter's needs were being met, something that had failed to happen during her lifetime. The judge in the case offered counseling to the jurors, acknowledging that the harrowing evidence they had heard would likely haunt them. The judge said that during jury selection, several individuals had refused to participate in the trial. She also stated that Rita's murder was one of the most serious murders the court had ever seen. She described it as a particularly heinous crime and horrifying because it occurred in the victim's own home. During the trial, Jessica's lawyer revealed that she had expressed remorse for her actions in a letter to her family. In the letter, Jessica acknowledged that Rita had not provoked her and took responsibility for her mother's death. Jessica was evaluated by a psychiatrist who noted that she often lacked facial expressions when communicating with others. Although Jessica showed limited emotions, she did not exhibit signs of schizophrenia or hallucinations. The psychiatrist's conclusion was that Jessica required long-term, comprehensive mental health support to manage her risk factors and address her underlying issues. Jessica was incarcerated in the strictest unit of the women's section at the correctional complex. Throughout her time in prison, she continued to engage in problematic behavior. An incident standout involved a dispute over food exchange on September 9, 2019, and she responded by throwing a teacup at another inmate. Although she was charged with assault in court the following day, she did not receive any additional punishment. There were several other notable incidents involving her during her imprisonment. She got into a fight with another inmate on October 14, 2019, and was punished with 5 days in solitary confinement. Additionally, she disobeyed an order on November 3, 2019, and damaged property on July 31, 2020, resulting in a fine of $200. Another assault incident occurred on November 21, 2020, for which she received 7 days in solitary confinement. In January 2021, she was convicted of common assault once more, but did not face any additional consequences. Jessica has defended her actions, explaining that no matter what she does or where she goes, other inmates will continue to cause her misery. She also pointed out that life behind bars is challenging and vastly different from life on the outside. One major issue in prisons is the high prevalence of mental health issues. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, in 2018, nearly half of Australian prisoners had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. Although there is no direct correlation between having a mental health condition and committing a crime, these statistics suggest that many prisoners in Australia struggled with mental health issues before their incarceration. Research has found a link between mental illnesses and in likelihood of committing crimes, especially among individuals with psychotic disorders. Symptoms of bipolar disorder can directly contribute to criminal acts, while extreme anxiety or stress can increase the risk of violent behavior due to heightened emotions and impulsivity. On the other hand, being in a prison environment can worsen existing mental health conditions. The harsh realities of prison life, including the potential for violence from inmates or staff, can trigger or worsen mental health issues. Prisons are considered especially inhospitable environments for individuals struggling with mental illness, as reported by the Australian Policy Development Centre. A significant decision was made in the Sydney Supreme Court on May 15, 2023, in the case of Jessica. The court, consisting of Justices Peter Hamill, Christine Adamson, and Richard Kavanagh, decided that Jessica's case should be retried due to exceptional circumstances. A significant factor in this decision was Jessica's unusual behavior following the crime. After beheading her mother, Jessica carried the head into the street and asked emergency services personnel if they could reattach it. This action showed that Jessica's understanding of reality was severely impaired. Several mental health experts, including psychiatrists and a psychologist, testified about Jessica's mental health. Their findings indicated that due to her intellectual disability and autism, she had difficulty distinguishing between right and wrong. As a result, Justice Hamill decided to re-sentence Jessica Camilleri to 16 years in prison, with the chance of parole in 12 years.